The chamber is open and full of whispers.
Before we dive in, check the link in the description if you want exclusive timelines, members-only videos you won't find on YouTube, all on our Patreon. The cupboard had a particular quality of silence in the hour before the house woke. The specific acoustic of a small enclosed space with a gap at the bottom of the door. The silence thinning when the central heating clicked on. The third floorboard from the top of the stairs that would creak at 6:30 when Vernon Dursley made his first journey to the bathroom. 340 pounds of man, distributed across a landing with the unconscious authority of someone who had never once considered that the space he occupied might once have belonged to someone else. Harry did not get up yet. He lay on the cot with his eyes open and did the accounting he always did at the start of a loop, an inventory. Not of grief or anger or the 1,000 years of accumulated loss, but of what he had and what he was going to do with it. The practice had evolved across 999 attempts. In the early loops it had been frantic, lists, urgency, the driven energy of someone who had discovered they could go back and fix everything and was trying to fix everything simultaneously. That urgency had eroded the way all urgency eroded without variation in outcome, replaced first by efficiency, then by method, and eventually by this 30 seconds of absolute stillness, pure accounting, no performance and no delay. 999 attempts, not one of them sufficient. Not because he hadn't won. He had won, in the majority of loops, by every available measure. Voldemort, dead. The war ended. The immediate, obvious suffering contained. But insufficient at ending, at producing the permanent close that death was waiting for. The loop's anchor condition finally satisfied. The 1,000th attempt the last, rather than just the next. He had catalogued the failures the way you catalogued anything you lived with long enough, not with horror anymore, but with the precision of a craftsman studying why a joint didn't hold. Loop 82, where he had destroyed every Horcrux by November of his 6th year and still died when Voldemort simply chose not to act on his own timeline, and outlasted Harry's alliances by 2 careful years. Loop 312, where everything had gone right until June and the contingency in Nagini's binding pulled the floor out from under a victory he had already counted. Loop 719, where he had won so thoroughly and so fast that the wizarding world had no framework to process the ending, no collective experience of having done it themselves. And the peace had lasted precisely 11 years before something he hadn't accounted for filled the vacuum he'd created. Winning was not ending. He had learned this the way you learned the things that mattered, which was by being wrong about them so many times that the wrongness became part of the texture of your understanding rather than something that still surprised you. He had, sometime around the 800s, arrived at a working hypothesis. The loop was counting whether the weight was shared. And Hermione Granger, brilliant, ancient Hermione Granger, who had been fighting this war alongside him across 999 lifetimes without knowing she was fighting it, who carried the same accumulated soul depth that he did behind a suppression her child's nervous system had installed as protective accommodation, had been asleep in every single one of them. Not absent. Not gone. Waiting, the way things waited when they had no other option. Carrying 999 lifetimes of half, experienced history from the inside of a life she didn't yet know was part of a larger pattern. The floorboard creaked. Harry lay still for another 30 seconds. Then he got up, dressed in clothes that were too large and too thin for a mid-August morning, took what he needed from the kitchen while the house was organized around the business of being the Dursley family without him, and walked out the front door at 7 o'clock while Vernon was in the shower and Petunia was laying Dudley's breakfast. He had £3.72 in his pocket, collected over 2 weeks from the loose change that the Dursley household distributed across its surfaces the way most households distributed dust. Enough for a coach ticket to Oxford. He walked to the station. He bought the ticket. He sat in the back row and watched Surrey dissolve into the motorway, and then into the gentler geography of Oxfordshire, the particular green of English countryside in late summer, and he did not sleep, and he thought about a girl in a house on a street lined with elms, who did not know she was waiting, who was at that moment almost certainly reading because she was always reading, from as early as she could hold a book, who carried inside her, behind the circuit breaker, 999 lifetimes of everything they had done together. The house on Elms Road was tidy in the way of people who took care of things without making the taking care of things their primary identity. The garden was summer-trimmed, the path swept, and out front stood a tree considerably larger than its neighbors. A tree that Hermione Granger, 3 months past her 7th birthday on that late summer morning, had been climbing with a competence that concerned her parents, in the specific way that competent children concerned parents who hadn't yet understood what category of person they were raising. Harry stood at the end of the road and looked at the house for one moment. Just one. Then he walked up the path and knocked. Helen Granger answered, 31 years old, mid-task, answering the door anyway because that was simply what you did. She looked at the small boy on her doorstep, underfed, wearing clothes a size too large, arrived apparently by himself from the other side of the county, and her expression did the rapid triage of a capable woman encountering an unexpected variable and deciding how seriously to treat it. "Hello," Harry said. "Hello," she looked past him at the empty path. "Are you here by yourself?" "Yes, I came on the coach from Surrey. My name is Harry Potter. I need to speak with your daughter." He paused, selecting the correct tone from the available options. "I know this is unusual. I also know you're not going to let a strange 7-year-old into your house without an explanation, and I want you to know that I think that's the correct instinct. I'm prepared to give you one." Helen Granger looked at him for a long moment. "Come in," she said, in the tone of a woman making a decision she wasn't entirely certain about, and proceeding anyway, because something in the boy's absolute stillness was telling her that uncertainty was not the same as error. "I'll put the kettle on." The sitting room was exactly as Harry knew it from the loops where he had visited Oxford for other purposes. The bookshelves that ran the full length of the back wall, the reading chair in the corner that had developed a slight lean from years of one person, consistently preferring one arm over the other, the arrangement of furniture that Helen had settled on when Hermione was 3 and not substantially altered since. He sat on the sofa and looked at the bookshelves and waited. Hermione came downstairs 7 minutes later. She was 7 years old, wearing a blue cardigan over a white shirt, with a book still in her left hand, because she had been reading when her mother called her down. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked at Harry with an expression he had seen across 999 loops and every age she had ever worn. The same expression underneath, regardless of the face wearing it. Assessing, organizing, deciding what category this belonged to before deciding what to do about it. "You're Harry Potter," she said. Yes, she came into the sitting room and chose the chair beside the bookshelf, not the reading chair, which was hers, and which she didn't occupy with strangers, a detail consistent across every loop, and positioned herself with the shelves at her back, which Harry had concluded she did by instinct for the same reason soldiers chose seats against walls. Helen brought tea. She set it down and sat beside Harry on the sofa, with the posture of a parent who was going to be present for whatever this was, whether or not she had been invited. "I'm going to tell you something true," Harry said, "and I need both of you to stay with it through all of it before you decide what to think about it. It's the kind of thing that sounds wrong from the beginning and only becomes coherent near the end. Is that acceptable?" Hermione glanced at her mother. Helen nodded. Harry told them. Not the full accounting, not 999 deaths catalogued by method, not the inventory of failures he kept in a closed compartment of his mind during the first days of every loop. He told them the shape of it. The loop. The Deathly Hallows. The mechanic of return. That he was 7 years old in a body, and not in anything else. That what lived inside the 7-year-old body had no clean or comfortable name. He told it in the flat, organized way he had developed across several hundred conversations with people who needed to hear true things that had no natural home in their existing understanding of the world. When he finished, Helen had not touched her tea. Hermione had drunk half of hers. "The anamnesis bridge," Hermione said. Harry went still. "You described it as a recognition," she said carefully, like someone reading a theorem aloud to test whether it still held. "Not a transfer. The same soul, carrying what it always carried, waiting for the suppression to release. Because the circuit breaker was installed as accommodation, not damage." She set down her cup. "You've tried it before. On me, specifically." "3 times, Harry said, in earlier loops, and the 3rd time I asked you how many times you'd done it without asking." "Yes, I don't remember that." She looked at her hands. "I'm 7. I don't know what a loop is, but I know you're telling the truth, which I can't explain, and I know the shape of what you're describing from the inside in a way I also can't explain. And I think those 2 things are related to each other." "They are," Harry said. "So there's a version of me in there," she said slowly, "who has done all of this with you. 999 times. Yes, and you want to wake her up." "I want to ask you if you want me to wake her up," Harry said. "That's different. That's why I'm here, instead of just doing it." The room was very quiet. Helen made a sound that wasn't a word. "One condition," Hermione said. "Yes, you tell me everything. Not the managed version. Not what you think I need." She held his gaze with a quality that had nothing to do with being 7 years old. "If I'm your equal, I'm your equal from the beginning. Not after you've decided the plan is final." Harry looked at her across the sitting room in Oxford on a late summer morning, the book still resting on the arm of her chair with its unfinished chapter waiting. "Yes," he said. "Then do it." The working took 11 minutes, refined across 3 prior attempts to the point where the mechanics were exact. He held the intent of the bridge in his mind, with the precision that 999 loops of magical practice produced, and reached, not physically, into the resonance of her, the weight of her, the particular gravity of a soul that had been doing this as long as he had, and removed the suppression the way you removed a hand from a light switch. He did not give her anything. He simply stopped holding the door closed. The light, when it came, was hers. She sat very still for nearly 7 minutes. Harry counted. Helen sat beside him with one hand over her mouth and made no sound at all. Then, at 6 minutes and 40 seconds, Hermione's eyes changed, not dramatically. Nothing a stranger would have named. But Harry had spent 999 loops watching Hermione Granger's eyes in every configuration, and he knew what it looked like when the full depth of a consciousness that had been carrying this much for this long came fully present in a face rather than partially present. She blinked. She looked at the room, the bookshelves, her mother, the tea on the table. The book with the unfinished chapter, and there was something in the looking that was different from how 7-year-olds looked at things. "Oh," she said. It was the sound of someone who has just remembered an enormous amount and found their body entirely insufficient for the expression of it. Small and true, and the only available word. "Yes," Harry said. 999. Yes. Her expression moved through grief and recognition and something that occupied the space between anger and relief, and settled into something organized. Processing complete. Next action identified. "My mother," she said quietly, "is sitting right there." She turned to Helen, who was looking at her daughter with the expression of a woman who understood that something had happened that she had no framework for. That her daughter was different, present in a way that 7-year-olds were not, and that the boy on the sofa had done something real and her daughter had agreed to it. "Mum," Hermione said, in a voice that was simultaneously hers and 999 loops old, and both of those things at once. I'm going to need to explain several things. It's going to take a while. But I need you to know that I'm all right. I'm more all right than I've been in a very long time." Helen looked at her. "Are you still my daughter?" Hermione's expression did something Harry had never seen on her face across 999 loops. Something purely 7 years old, purely the child she was in this body. The part of her that had not been waiting in the dark behind any circuit breaker but had been here, fully present, living this life with its loves. "I'm more your daughter than I was an hour ago," she said. "Because now I know what that means from the inside." Helen nodded once, with the quality of a woman who had made a decision at the front door and was going to keep making it. "I'll make more tea," she said. She went to the kitchen. Harry and Hermione sat in the sitting room and looked at each other across the distance that had always existed between them. The asymmetry of one person carrying everything and one person catching up. For the first time in 1,000 attempts, that distance was not there. Two people. The same weight, the same accumulated years, looking at each other from the same altitude. "You came here first," she said. "Yes, before the letter. Before all of it. Yes, because you finally understood you couldn't do it alone." "Yes," Harry said. "I'm sorry it took so long." "It took us so long," she said. "I was there too, in all of them." Then, without pausing, with the directness she applied to problems that needed facing, "Harry, the 7th Horcrux." He went very still. "You've addressed it in how many previous loops?" she asked. The word arrived in the room like a stone dropped from a height. "None," he said. "Because you were dying before it mattered in the early loops," she said, not accusingly, simply building the argument. "And in the later loops, you were winning without addressing it, but the loop was still resetting. Because you were still dying eventually. Because winning isn't ending. And I am the 7th Horcrux," Harry said. The piece of his soul that fractured off when the killing curse rebounded at Godric's Hollow and latched on to the nearest living thing. Until that fragment is destroyed, he cannot be made permanently mortal, regardless of what else we remove. "The Hallows give you an unusual relationship with death," Hermione said. "You've died 999 times and returned. Which means if the soul fragment inside you were destroyed by the right mechanism, I might come back without it," Harry said slowly. "The Elder Wand's authority over death, the resurrection stone as a bridge between living and lost. The cloak, which is yours." She was already reaching for her notepad. "We solve this problem before we solve any other. It's the foundation the rest of the plan rests on." Harry looked at her. He had spent 999 loops believing the Harry Horcrux problem had only one solution. One he had spent those same loops trying and failing to find a way around. And she had been awake for 11 minutes and had identified it as the first priority, and had immediately begun designing around it. This, he thought, was why the loop had been counting. "Tell me everything," she said, uncapping the pen. "From the beginning, the way you promised." He told her. She listened the way she listened when she had 999 loops of context to apply to what she was hearing, not simply receiving information but cross-referencing it against a record, pausing occasionally to ask a question that cut directly to the structural heart of a problem, and waited there until it was answered. Midway through the account of the 3rd year, the loop where he had gotten Sirius exonerated but lost him anyway to a ministry procedural error he hadn't seen coming, she held up a hand. "Loop 571, she said. "You were in St. Mungo's for 3 weeks after the Azkaban siege." Harry went still. "You remember loop 571. "I was 11, she said. "I sat beside your bed for 6 days. I didn't know what I was sitting beside. I thought I was visiting a classmate. But I knew something was wrong in a way that went past ordinary worry. Something that felt like waiting of someone who has been waiting for a very long time and does not know what they are waiting for." She paused. "The feeling I have carried since before I could name it. Since before I was old enough to understand I was carrying something." "I didn't know you were there," Harry said. "You were not conscious for most of it." She looked at her hands. Loop 312. You destroyed what you believed was the last Horcrux in February, and Voldemort returned in June, regardless. Why? A contingency in Nagini's binding. A soul anchor layered below the standard Horcrux structure that I hadn't identified yet. I found the reference in loop 407, but by then 312 was already gone. And in that loop, Hermione said, I was there for the June battle. I watched you fight something you believed should already have been defeated. I watched your face when you understood it wasn't over. She was quiet for a moment. From the inside, across all of them, it felt like searching for a book I had never read and somehow needed urgently. Like sitting an examination in a subject whose syllabus I had never been given. She uncapped her pen again. Every loop, from as early as I can place my own awareness, I carried the conviction that the world had more history than it was showing me. That I had more history than I could account for. You were looking for the weight, Harry said. I was looking for the weight, she agreed, without knowing what it was or where it had come from. And then you walked into my mother's sitting room and described it exactly. Helen came back from the kitchen with 2 mugs and the expression of a woman who had decided that understanding was a secondary concern to being present, and that being present was something she was entirely capable of. Right, she said, setting the mugs down. Start again, from the beginning. I want to hear all of it. They went to London several weeks into the autumn, Helen Granger driving. The subject of a 2-hour conversation she had spent building a framework for, because that was what the Grangers did with things that had no existing framework. Robert Granger had asked only whether the goblins were dangerous, and when Hermione said not to them specifically, had nodded and returned to his newspaper in the manner of a man who had decided that trust was the only instrument available, and was applying it with quiet determination. What they needed from Gringotts was not money. It was standing. Hermione had identified it the morning after her awakening, sitting cross-legged on the sitting room floor with a notepad. You've been working outside the institutional structures in every loop. You treat them as instruments, pick them up and put them down. You never establish standing within them. But Gringotts isn't the ministry. Gringotts predates the ministry by 4 centuries. The Goblin sovereignty framework is older than the Statute of Secrecy, and older than the Wizengamot, and it has a provision, the blood right of ancient standing, documented in a foundational legal accord from the latter half of the 18th century. It establishes recognized standing for magical persons of significant ancestral depth. It predates the concept of minimum age entirely, because it was written before that concept existed. The Potter line qualified through the Peverell ancestry, the Dagworth Granger connection. Hector Dagworth Granger, founder of the most extraordinary society of potioneers, a lineage that had passed into apparent obscurity when the Squib branch took the shortened name in the latter half of the 19th century, was in the Goblin records, intact, uncontested, dormant, waiting for someone to present it. The leaky cauldron was quiet in the late morning, and Tom the barkeep looked at the 2 children with the sensitivity of a man who had worked this particular threshold for 30 years and recognized when something didn't fit the expected pattern. The bricks opened when he tapped them. Helen stood in the pub and watched with the expression of someone managing the gap between being told a thing would happen and watching it happen. "I'll wait here," she said. "You might want tea," Hermione told her. "We could be a while." The verification chamber was 3 floors below the main hall, a circular room with walls lined by ledgers so old their spines had lost their text to centuries of handling. In the center sat a table of black stone with 2 shallow basins and 2 small silver instruments, resonance readers, goblin-made, predating wands, measuring the depth and age of a magical signature. The chief arbiter of ancient claims was Graknar, a goblin of concentrated age, features sharpened rather than softened by the decades, eyes carrying the quality of a very long attention span applied to a very specific and ancient practice. He had arrived in the chamber after the counter-goblin set down his quill, which in goblin professional protocol communicated a single thing: elevation above the category of ordinary transactions. The blood rite proceeded. Harry's blood into the first basin. The resonance reader produced a low, sustained tone, felt before it was heard, filling the chamber not with volume but with frequency. Hermione's blood into the second. The second reader matched the first. And then the tones harmonized. Not louder. Deeper, the quality of two ancient things recognizing each other in a formal setting for the first time, their resonance producing something neither made alone. Grocknar stood very still. The two attending officials went still behind him. The harmonization held for 11 seconds. Then it faded slowly, leaving the shape of itself in the stone air. Grocknar went to one knee. The attending officials followed, not to Harry, to both of them. He rose after 3 seconds and looked at them with an expression that was not entirely professional. "The standing is verified," he said. "The depth of signature is without precedent in the records I have studied. The harmonization has no precedent in any archive I have access to." A pause. "I will record it as 2 lines that have been in proximity for a very long time, recognizing each other in a formal setting for the first time." "There are 3 further matters," Hermione said. Grocknar looked at her. "A sealed contingency record, a complete account of the Horcrux objects, their locations, their nature, and the methodology for their destruction. To be opened only if both of us die simultaneously and do not return within 48 hours. She glanced at Harry. "Second, we need access to the Goblin Blood Verification Archives on behalf of the Weasley family account, in the matter of a registered gift animal recorded in the autumn of 1981. This is relevant to an evidence record we are building for the Department of Magical Law Enforcement." "And the third matter?" Grocknar said. Harry said, "I carry something that doesn't belong to me. A fragment of a soul anchored inside me the night my parents were killed, when a rebounding curse caused an already fractured soul to splinter further. The fragment makes me, technically, a 7th Horcrux." The chamber was very quiet. "We believe," Hermione said, "that the Deathly Hallows provide a mechanism to destroy the fragment without permanently destroying the host. The Elder Wand's authority over death, the Resurrection Stone as a bridge, and the Invisibility Cloak as the Hollow of Acceptance together create conditions that do not exist in any other configuration. The process will require Harry to be between states, not conventionally alive or conventionally dead, for a period we estimate at several hours. We need Gringotts to maintain a sealed stasis on his body for the required duration, and to hold formal witness to the process." Grocknar looked at them for a long, measuring moment. "You are proposing," he said carefully, "to destroy a piece of Voldemort's soul currently residing inside a 7-year-old boy, using the 3 legendary artifacts of death in my verification chamber." "Yes," they said together. "And you would like us to ensure you come back." "We would like you to hold the door open," Harry said simply. Another silence. Then Grocknar said, "The Hollows are goblin-adjacent in their origin. The Elder Wand's lineage passes through our records. The Chamber of Verification is an appropriate setting." He looked at Harry with something that was not quite professional and not quite personal. "Document the contingency record first. The blood verification matter will be addressed simultaneously by my colleagues. The third matter follows." "Then we start now," Hermione said, and picked up the quill. The working that followed, the careful, precise, genuinely frightening process of using the Elder Wand's particular authority and the Resurrection Stone's bridge between states to separate the unwanted soul fragment from the living one, took 4 hours and left Harry deeply, profoundly exhausted, in a way that had nothing to do with the body. The 4 hours that followed were not like the previous 999 deaths. Those had been cuts, hard and immediate, the severance of a consciousness from a body that death always was. Nothing gradual about any of them. This was different. This was slow and deliberate and navigated rather than experienced, the Elder Wand's authority making a space between living and not living that should not have been possible to occupy, and Harry occupying it with the intentionality of someone who knew exactly what he was there to do and had one chance to do it cleanly. He found the fragment. He had always known it was there. In the abstract, feeling it directly, from the inside, was another category of knowing entirely. It was cold in the way that things were cold when they had never been warm. Not the cold of something that had lost heat, but the cold of something that had never understood heat as a concept. A 7-decade-old fragment of a soul that had made certain decisions early and organized everything around those decisions so thoroughly that the decisions were no longer separable from whatever it was. He held the boundary of himself very clearly, and he let the fragment go. Not with force. With the patience of someone who had spent the equivalent of 1,000 years learning that the things that needed to release released better when you stopped holding them. He came back to the verification chamber floor with the stone cold beneath his back and Hermione sitting cross-legged beside him, arms folded. Expression doing the thing it did when she had been frightened and had chosen not to show it because showing it would not have been useful. Graknar stood at the edge of the room with the stillness of someone who had just witnessed something he would be writing about for the rest of his professional life. "Well," Hermione said. "Well," Harry said. "How do you feel?" He considered this with genuine care, turning the question over, looking for the accurate answer rather than the available one. "Lighter," he said. "I feel lighter." She uncapped her pen and made a note. The Hogwarts letter arrived on a Tuesday, the school's owls delivering to Surrey coming from the north, as they always did, Hogwarts being in Scotland. The bird landed on the garden wall while Harry was pulling weeds from Petunia's rose beds and held out its leg with the professional patience of a creature that had a delivery to make and would wait for as long as necessary. He untied the letter. He read it. It said exactly what it had said 999 times before. And he felt, reading it this 1,000th time, something he had not expected to feel. Not the flat familiarity of an extremely known document, not the mild professional interest of administrative correspondence. Something older and quieter than either of those. He was going home. Hagrid arrived on a Saturday night, well past midnight, with the motorcycle and the pink umbrella and the slab of cake and the dimensional excess of someone built for a different scale of world who moved through the ordinary one by simple displacement. He looked at Harry opening the front door before he had even knocked. He had aimed for the door and clipped the adjacent wall, which was also consistent, and said Harry with the compound of grief and relief and pride that was Hagrid's particular response to this moment. "Hagrid," Harry said. "Come in. I'll make tea." Hagrid came in. Vernon descended the stairs in his dressing gown and stopped 3 steps from the bottom and looked at Hagrid and then at Harry already in the kitchen with the kettle, moving with the efficiency of someone who knew where everything was kept, and his expression prepared its speech about normalcy and found the same surface it always found these days when it aimed at Harry, nothing to push against, and he went back to bed. Dudley consumed the cake in the sitting room with the focused application of a 10-year-old encountering baked goods at midnight, and Harry sat at the kitchen table with Hagrid and let the familiar script of the telling unfold naturally, because the script of this conversation was not the problem and did not need to be altered. Midway through an explanation of the separation between the wizarding and muggle worlds, Hagrid paused. "You've gone very quiet." "I was listening," Harry said. "You were saying something that mattered." He held the mug with both hands and looked at the table. "Tell me about my parents. Not the story everyone tells, just what they were like. Who they were." The kitchen went quiet in a different way. Hagrid's enormous face did something that it did rarely. It went completely still, not in the controlled way of someone managing an emotion. but in the genuine way of someone going to a place they kept carefully and finding the door already open. James was the sort of person who made a room louder just by being in it, Hagrid said, after a moment. Energy, yay no, like something was always about to happen when he was around. And your mum, Lily, she was the one who made sure something worth happening actually happened. He picked up his tea. Together they were something. Thank you, Harry said, and meant it in a way he had not managed in 999 loops. Hagrid applied himself to what remained of his cake, with the industry of someone redirecting emotional energy into physical activity, a characteristic Harry had never had the stillness to notice as characteristic before. He noticed it now. Diagon Alley the next morning held its compressed vitality, its particular noise, Gringotts' white marble at the far end like a sentence's final word. Harry rounded the corner from Quality Quidditch Supplies, where Hagrid had paused to look at a Nimbus 2000 in the window with the expression of a man who genuinely loved the game, and found the Grangers outside flourish and blots. Hermione had a list, and the alert expression she wore in Diagon Alley in every loop. Not wonder, exactly, but the more complex experience of encountering something you know entirely with your mind for the first time with your body. She looked up and saw him. Harry Potter, she said. Hermione Granger, he said. Behind Harry, Hagrid made the sound he made when something was heartwarming in a way he found difficult to contain. At Ollivander's, the wand, Holly, 11 inches, Phoenix Feather, found him as it always found him, with the warm surge of old recognition and the unease in Ollivander's pale eyes that always accompanied the moment when he connected the core to the other wand that shared it. Curious, Ollivander said softly, looking not at the wand but at Harry. Very curious indeed. He knew what the other wand had done. Harry knew too. He had known it for the equivalent of centuries. He held the wand in his hand and felt its warmth and thought, one more time, and the last. The castle appeared across the lake at dusk, rising from the dark as it always rose, establishing itself as a fact about the world that required no argument, permitted no qualification. Harry had crossed this water 999 times. He crossed it now with Hermione beside him in the same boat, and Ron Weasley and Neville Longbottom across from them, the castle coming out of the dark with the accumulated force of 1,000 years of use. Neville was already searching his pockets for his toad, Trevor, who had made a bid for freedom somewhere between the Hogsmeade station and the boats. He does that, Ron said, with the resigned authority of someone who had been briefed extensively by 5 older siblings. He'll come back, Neville said, with the optimism of someone who had been wrong about this many times and had decided to keep trying it anyway. He looked at Harry with an expression that was round-faced and open and, underneath the obvious nerves of first night, quietly solid in a way that Harry had spent 999 loops learning to recognize. I'm Neville. Neville Longbottom. Harry, this is Hermione. I know, Neville said, and then caught himself. I mean, I know of you. My Gran talks about your families. A pause. About your parents, specifically, she says. She said she always thought it happened differently than they said. The night of October 31st. Harry looked at him. The Longbottom name had come up in the Gringotts chamber, the only prior holder of the blood right, a man who had lived in the middle of the previous century. It was not a coincidence, Harry had come to believe, that Neville Longbottom at 11 years old carried a particular quality of quiet weight. Not the same as Harry and Hermione's accumulated depth, but recognizable. The gravity of a family that had been shaped by a war and was still being shaped by its aftermath. Your Gran is right, Harry said. Neville looked at him for a moment, something flickering in his expression. Is it going to come out? The truth of it? Yes, Harry said. This year. Neville absorbed this. He looked at the castle growing larger across the dark water. He didn't say anything else, but his hands, which had been tight in his lap, slowly unclenched. The boats reached the shore. Professor McGonagall waited in the entrance hall with the composed authority of a woman who had been doing this for 30 years and brought to it the full weight of her attention every single time, because she believed the ceremony deserved exactly that. She looked at the first years filing in with the assessment of a professional who had learned to read children in the first 5 seconds and was rarely wrong. Her gaze passed Harry, came back, moved to Hermione, came back again. Harry had watched McGonagall's face in this moment, across 999 loops, and he knew its standard configuration for the sight of him. Recognition, brief grief, recomposition. He had never seen it do what it did now. Recognition, then something adjacent to grief but not quite it. Then the expression of someone encountering a pattern for which they have no column in any existing ledger. She was sensitive enough to feel the weight. And they were standing beside each other. She recovered, because she was McGonagall and recovery was one of her primary competencies. She gave her speech about the houses and the values and the sorting. Her voice was steady. Her bearing was precisely what it always was. But her eyes came back twice. The hat's song finished. The sorting proceeded. Longbottom, Neville, 45 seconds, the longest deliberation of the evening. And then Gryffindor, and Neville exhaled with every cell of his body simultaneously and walked to the table with his chin up. Granger, Hermione, the hat sat on her head and went completely still. Not the usual settling, not the quality of something active beginning its reading. Just stillness, as though it had picked up a book it had read before and was deciding what to do about the fact that it had changed. 15 seconds, 25, 30, then a brief sharp motion, as though it had startled, and then, in a voice that was immediate and certain rather than deliberate. Gryffindor. Potter, Harry, he sat on the stool, and the hat came down, and the darkness arrived. 1000th time, the hat said, without preamble. Yes, I remember every loop. The sorting hat is older than the loop, and I am not reset with the others. I have watched you carry more with each attempt, and I have watched you fail to end it each time. A pause. Until now. I can feel her from here, the other one. She sat where you are sitting 20 minutes ago. She carries the same weight as you. The harmonization was audible to me from across the room. Another pause, longer. I have a question before I place you. Ask. Your courage is not Gryffindor's courage. Gryffindor's courage is action in the face of fear. You stopped being afraid in the conventional sense somewhere around your 400s. What you have carried since then is something older. Faithfulness to an ending that kept not coming. Patience across a duration no system of measurement was built to account for. That is not a house. That is a practice. A silence. But she is in Gryffindor. And the work requires you in the same place. Like something that was supposed to happen, the hat said. Finally happening. Then it said, in the voice it used for the entire hall, I would like to be excused from sorting these two. The hall went completely still. They are beyond my authority to sort, it continued into the silence. What they carry is older than the categories I was made to apply. The choice of house, in their case, should be their own. A pause. I would suggest Gryffindor. I would not presume to require it. Harry lifted the hat from his head. He held it for a moment the way you held something you had known for a very long time, with the care of familiarity rather than reverence, and then he set it on the stool. He walked to the Gryffindor table and sat down across from Hermione. The hall erupted. Not all at once, it built. The way hall noise built when the collective social processing of 500 people reached its conclusion simultaneously, starting at the Gryffindor table and moving outward in the way that significant things moved through crowds. McGonagall stood beside the stool with the hat in her hands and an expression that Harry had never once seen on her face in any configuration. Not the careful composure, not the managed grief, not the professional authority. Something genuinely open. The expression of a woman who had been doing something for 30 years and had, tonight, been shown that the thing she had been doing was larger than she had understood it to be. She held the hat for a moment. Then she set it with precise care on the shelf beside the stool, and the preciseness of it was its own kind of response. The act of a person who needed something to do with their hands while they processed. Ron Weasley, at the Gryffindor table, looked at Harry, and then at Hermione, and then at the stool where the hat was sitting and said, to no one in particular, "Did that just happen?" "Yes," said Percy Weasley, 3 seats down, with the tone of someone filing it carefully for later, and making no further comment. Neville, who had been at the table long enough to watch both Hermione's sorting and Harry's in their entirety, had the expression of someone who had arrived at Hogwarts, very uncertain whether they belonged here, and had just watched the oldest arbiter of belonging in the building essentially decline to adjudicate, which he was still working out how to feel about. At the staff table, Albus Dumbledore sat with his hands folded, and the arithmetic of a man who had just watched something happen that would require him to revise a very large number of assumptions. He reached for a lemon drop, set it down without eating it, looked at 2 11-year-olds sitting across from each other at the Gryffindor table who had just been, in the clearest possible terms, deferred to by the oldest and most authoritative intelligence in the room. He looked at the enchanted ceiling and began revising. Potions was on a Thursday, in the dungeons, in the cold that was the cold of a space underground that had been underground for centuries. Severus Snape entered the way he always entered, the robes, the preceding silence, the atmospheric quality of a man whose relationship with dramatic effect had become so practiced it had ceased to require effort. He looked at his new first years with the inventory expression, the assessment of a man taking stock of a new consignment of something he expected to find largely inadequate. His gaze reached Harry. Stopped in 999 loops, Harry had received this gaze with the defensive awareness of a child who knew he was being watched and was bracing for it. He looked back now with the full, settled, patient attention of someone who had weighed Severus Snape many times across 1,000 years, who had raged at him and pitied him and finally, around the 400s, arrived at the clarity that came after you ran out of loops to be angry in. Snape recalibrated. Visibly, the control returned fast and complete. He asked his diagnostic questions, the drought of living death, the bezoar. Harry answered with precision, powdered root of asphodel added to an infusion of wormwood, the Lily family substitution from a second-hand potions text available 3 doors from Flourish and Blots, the variation in potency it introduced. Hermione answered the bezoar question with altitude variance data on goat-sourced antidotes, documented in Adalbert Waffling's secondary papers. The texts available in the general reference section of the library, 3rd shelf from the left. The room had the quality of a social order being revised in real time. At the end of class, Snape set Harry's potion and Hermione's aside on his desk, the 2 preparations sitting next to each other, with the quality of things made by the same pair of hands working in 2 different registers. Hers theoretical, precise from the inside out. His embodied, the automaticity of centuries of practice. Something moved through Snape's expression as he looked at them, not the controlled hostility, not the grief and obligation compound, something that existed before those layers had been built, the look of a person who against every prepared intention had found something genuinely interesting. He caught himself, dismissed the class. But as Harry and Hermione walked out into the corridor, they heard the single sound of a man setting down a glass vial, just once, with particular care, as though the thing in his hand had changed weight. The cold knock came on a Wednesday in mid-November, the library candlelit, the grounds beyond the windows entirely dark. Harry reading a text he had not known to look for until Hermione's questioning had opened the correct angle of approach. He closed the book when the signal arrived. 3rd floor, he said. without looking up. Hermione set down her quill. How long has he been building? Since October. He's been pinging for weeks, short pulses, checking whether I react. Tonight is different. He's decided the information he's gathered is enough, and the longer he waits, the worse his position becomes. Harry stood. He's the patient emperor. But his patience has a cost threshold. We've been visibly different since September. The sorting, the potions class, the quality of us that certain people can feel. He's felt it. He's moved. They walked quickly through corridors that shifted subtly to accommodate them, the castle's ward layer responding with the indifferent efficiency of a very old machine that knew its own operators. The third-floor corridor door was open. Fluffy was awake, all three heads raised and alert, all attention on Quirrell, who was pressed against the wall beside the trapdoor. He had moved too fast. The enchanted harp that a more patient timeline would have included was absent. Harry spoke, not in English. In the founding compact's grammar, the language that existed below language, the one that addressed the ward layer and the castle's ancient consciousness directly. He spoke not in command but in recognition, acknowledging the Guardian's function and its correctness, asking whether a brief suspension was possible given the circumstances. All three heads turned and looked at him. The middle head made a sound in the bass register, felt in the chest before it reached the ears, like the resonance of very old stone finding its frequency. Then all three heads settled into deliberate, watchful stillness. Permission given. Quirrell had watched this happen. The anxious professor's surface had dropped entirely, and what was underneath it, the cold intelligence, the diminished fragment of a greater consciousness wearing a living body like a borrowed coat, looked at Harry with the expression of a predator that has just discovered its model of the prey was wrong. Harry walked toward him. "Don't," he said. The word carried the founding compact's grammar underneath it, ancient and unambiguous. Quirrell's wand hand lowered 2 inches. Calculation, the calculation of a mind that had survived everything through precision. Firing before understanding the target was statistically worse than 2 seconds of additional intelligence gathering. In those 2 seconds, Hermione was at the trapdoor. She knelt and pressed her palm to it, and addressed the lock not with the castle's grammar, but with a deep theoretical understanding of what locks were, and what conditions could legitimately justify their release. The lock considered her argument. It opened. Quirrell cast. Harry moved sideways and cast, simultaneously, wandless. The variant of Expelliarmus he had spent centuries developing into something that carried more weight than the standard charm. And the wand left Quirrell's hand and hit the stone floor, and all three of Fluffy's heads oriented on Quirrell with the attention of a guardian that has been observing and has reached its verdict. Quirrell went still. The cold intelligence looked out at Harry. "You moved early," Harry said. "The return cannot be prevented." Quirrell's voice, but not, the warmth removed, the flat transmission of a consciousness that had spent a decade between states and remembered what warmth sounded like without possessing it. "Every Horcrux has been accounted for," Harry said, "including the one that was inside me, which is no longer there. You have no anchors. You have a borrowed body, no Philosopher's Stone, and a set of Death Eaters who are not going to receive the summons you plan to send tonight." He looked at the cold eyes steadily. "Leave him. The host survives. You persist in whatever diminished form is available. That is the alternative. The intelligence calculated. Flight required a host. Combat had already demonstrated its ceiling. The offer was the only option that preserved any future capacity." Quirrell's body collapsed, not violently, simply suddenly inadequate, the animating will withdrawing through the wall and into the castle's stone and outward toward the grounds, and the man who had been Quirinus Quirrell lay on the cold floor and was only himself again. Harry picked up the wand from the stone where it had landed and placed it beside its owner's hand with the care of someone returning something to its rightful place. Hermione stood. It's heading for the grounds. I know. No anchors. It goes dormant. Harry looked at Quirrell. We need to get him to the hospital wing. Behind them, the trapdoor closed, quietly, permanently, doing exactly what it was built to do. The threat of second year arrived before term began, which was the version of it Harry had been preparing for. On the first morning of September, walking the second-floor corridor toward Charms, Harry felt the cold knock of a Horcrux from 3 feet away, clean and deliberate, the frequency of a compressed soul fragment in a physical object, already working. He followed the signal to its source, Ginny Weasley's bag, carried by a first-year girl who walked with the slightly overwhelmed quality of someone in a new environment, managing the newness, with the effort of someone who didn't want to appear to be managing it. He found her at breakfast the next morning. She was sitting slightly apart from the other first years, not excluded but in the ambiguous space of a youngest sibling in a school where older siblings had already made the social map. He sat across from her. I'm Harry, he said. I know, she said. I'm Ginny, I know. Ron talks about you. He looked at her directly. I need to ask you something, and I need you to know I'm asking because I want to help. Not because you're in trouble. She shifted from social register to careful. The alertness he had learned across the loops was characteristic of her. In your bag, he said quietly, there's a book. Black cover, no title. She went very still. How do you know about that? I know what it is. It isn't safe. I need you to give it to me. She looked at him for a long moment, and he waited, because the quality of Ginny Weasley's courage was the courage of someone who made her own decisions rather than having them made for her, and pressuring that quality produced exactly the opposite of what he needed. Something's been wrong, she said, very quietly. Since I found it. There are gaps. Things I did that I can't remember. I know, he said. That's what it does. It feeds on the person writing in it and fills the gaps with itself. Another moment. Then she reached into her bag and set the diary on the table between them. Harry picked it up. The soul fragment inside it oriented on him immediately. Aware, assessing, the cold intelligence of Tom Riddle at 16 compressed into paper and ink, encountering something it had not expected to encounter. He put it in his bag and let it assess him through the fabric. Is it going to be all right? Ginny asked, with the directness of someone making sure they were asking the question they meant to ask rather than the safer version of it. Yes, Harry said. You just need to not have it anymore. She nodded. Thank you, she said. For just asking, instead of making it into something bigger than it needed to be. Go eat breakfast, Harry said. You've got Charms first. Professor Flitwick is one of the best teachers in this school. She almost smiled. Then she did. He went to the chamber alone, for the Parseltongue. The second-floor bathroom, Moaning Myrtle's domain. She confirmed the entrance with the enthusiasm of someone whose defining anecdote had finally been asked for. And then the pipe and the drop into the chamber's antechamber, and the door with its stone serpents, and finally, the chamber itself. The basilisk was approximately 50 feet of ancient scale, the coils resting on the stone floor, the head raised. The eyes were closed. I am not Riddle, Harry said in Parseltongue. I know, the basilisk said, the sound felt in the chest, subsonic as much as sonic. You are older than you look. You smell like something that has been alive a very long time in ways that disagree with your body. I carry old things. The heir who commanded me smelled of something wrong, not old. A wound reopened repeatedly. That was Tom Riddle, Harry said. Not Slytherin. He was careful here. Careful to be honest, rather than convenient. Salazar Slytherin's original instruction was to guard this place, and to judge those who enter by the quality of their intent. That is what you were built to do. But Slytherin also wanted this place to serve his views on who deserved to study magic. That part of the instruction was his, and I won't pretend otherwise. He paused. What Riddle added was the command, the targeting, the compulsion to act on it. That layer is his, not Slytherin's. And I can dissolve it. Return you to the original binding, the guardianship without the compulsion. The basilisk was very still. I have done things I was commanded to do, it said. That were not mine to choose. Yes, I know. I can't undo them. I can only remove the mechanism that would continue them. Destroy the diary here, the basilisk said. I want to feel the compulsion release. Harry performed the dissolution, the soul fragment working, the Hallows' authority applied to the compressed consciousness inside the book. The diary Riddle fought, as they always fought. A fragment of soul with independent existence valued that existence above almost everything. It took 9 minutes. The diary went cold. Then, inert, just paper. He set it on the chamber floor, and the basilisk lowered its great head to the level of it, and breathed. Something shifted, the long, slow release of a tension so deeply held it had become structural, the body reorganizing around its own sudden absence. Yes, the basilisk said, that is different. The Riddle compulsion is gone, Harry said. What remains is Slytherin's original binding and the chamber and what you are. What I am, the basilisk said, with the flatness of accurate description rather than self-pity, is very old, very tired, and very alone. I know, Harry said. I'll tell Dumbledore you're here. Not today, but soon. He should know. The girl, the basilisk said, the one who carried the diary. She'll be all right, Harry said. She's more resilient than most people know. Good, said the basilisk. A single word, containing everything it needed to contain. Harry stood in the chamber for a moment longer, looking up at the stone face of Salazar Slytherin carved into the far wall, the face of a man who had been dead for 1,000 years, and whose combination of gifts and prejudices had set most of the architecture of the war Harry had been fighting for the equivalent of 10 centuries. He had complicated feelings about Slytherin. He had, across the loops, arrived at the version of those feelings that lived on the other side of simplicity, the understanding that people could be brilliant and terrible in the same breath, that the best and worst of what they built often came from the same source, and that engaging with that honestly was more useful than resolving it into something easier to hold. The basilisk was breathing, the long, slow rhythm of something very old in a space built for it, doing what it was supposed to do, finally and simply. One more thing, Harry said. What is your name? A pause. Long enough that he thought it might not answer. I was not given one, the basilisk said at last. I was given a purpose. That was considered sufficient. It wasn't, Harry said. Another pause. No, the basilisk agreed. It wasn't. Harry looked at the great closed eyes, the ancient scales, the coils that had lived in this dark for 1,000 years. I'll think of one, he said, for when I come back to tell Dumbledore you're here. He felt the quality of the basilisk's stillness change, not dramatically, not in any way he could have pointed to. But the change was there. He walked back through the chamber, through the passage, up through the pipe. Moaning Myrtle was waiting, transparent and attentive, with the expression of someone whose bathroom had just been the site of significant magical activity, and who intended to be fully informed about all of it. Harry told her she had been very helpful. She went pink in the way that ghosts went pink when something genuinely pleased them and failed to produce any visible effect on their actual color. He walked back to the common room and found Hermione in her chair with a book and the question in her expression before he'd said a word. It's done, he said. The compulsion is gone. She nodded. And the basilisk? Is fine, Harry said. Is. I think. Actually fine. She looked at him for a moment, reading something in the phrasing. Good, she said simply, and returned to her book. Third year brought Sirius Black's escape from Azkaban. which the prophet reported with the energy of information designed to produce maximum fear in a readership already primed to feel it. Ron read the article at breakfast and said, "They think he's coming for you," with the frank directness that Harry had come to consider one of his most valuable qualities. "I know," Harry said. "Are you worried?" Harry thought about how to answer this accurately. "No," he said. Ron looked at him, decided to trust the assessment, and reached for another sausage. That was also one of Ron's valuable qualities. Since October of second year, Harry had been tracking the temporal signature of the rat in Ron's pocket through the time sight, the faculty that had developed quietly across his second year. The pattern reading of someone who had repeated the same temporal sequence enough times to perceive its shape as a structure rather than an experience. Pettigrew's 12 years as a stationary rat in the same pocket had left a dense, repetitive bruise on the timeline. Harry could find him in any room within 2 corridors. What he needed was the right setting for the exposure. Hermione found it. She was in the library when Harry arrived with the problem, and she was out of her chair and at the reference shelf before he'd finished describing the constraint. The head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement is scheduled to visit the castle in the 3rd week of October, she said, returning with a Ministry Administrative Almanac she had apparently read cover to cover at some point in September. Routine security consultation about Black's escape. She'll be at the staff table for dinner. She set the almanac on the table. If Pettigrew is exposed with her present, the evidence cannot be minimized. Her name is Amelia Bones, Harry said. I know, Hermione said. She has a 17-year record of pursuing cases the Ministry would rather have dropped. She's exactly who we need. On the specified evening, Neville Longbottom sat across from Ron at dinner, talking about herbology with the concentrated pleasure it reliably produced in him. Ron was mid-sentence on a Quidditch rule of dubious accuracy when his pocket erupted. The spatial drama of an animagus reversal under compulsion, something rat-sized becoming man-sized in the compressed space of a robe pocket, was not subtle. Peter Pettigrew hit the floor and was on his feet in 2 seconds, 12 years of survival instinct, operational before conscious thought could catch up. He saw the exits. He saw 500 people holding very still. He saw Harry. Then, he saw the woman at the staff table on her feet, with one hand near her wand and 30 years of professional efficiency already engaged. Peter Pettigrew, Amelia Bones said. Her voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. Neville Longbottom, across the table from Ron, looked at the man on the floor. His hands were flat on the table and very still. Madam Bones, Harry said, standing, there is a sealed record in the Gringotts verification chamber containing complete evidence. Ward's signature data logged in the castle's founding compact layer, demonstrating that the signature present at my parents' home the night they were killed was Peter Pettigrew's, not Sirius Black's. The record also documents Pettigrew's animagus registration, conducted privately in the late 1970s rather than officially. It appears in Gringotts' blood verification archive under the Weasley family account as a gift animal. Bones cast 3 spells in rapid succession: Binding Charm, Identity Verification. Stasis. The verification charm produced a small light. Pettigrew, Peter, it announced. Status: deceased. Deceased, Bones said, looking at the very much living man in front of her. Your name is in the Gringotts access conditions, Hermione said. We included it when we identified you as the most reliable senior ministry official. Bones looked at her. Then at Harry. How old are you? 13, Harry said. A long pause. Of course you are, Bones said, and went back to work. Ron Weasley sat at the Gryffindor table and looked at the space where Scabbers had lived in his pocket for 12 years, with the expression of someone processing several things simultaneously. Betrayal and relief, and the disorientation of discovering that a known fact about your life was not the fact you thought it was. Harry sat down beside him. He was never your rat, Harry said. He was hiding. That's different from belonging. Ron looked at him, His jaw was tight with the effort of managing something. Is Sirius Black actually innocent? Yes, and they're going to fix it? Bones is going to fix it? Bones is going to fix it! Harry said. That's what she does. Ron was quiet for a moment. Then, 12 years. He was in our house for 12 years. Another pause, shorter. I pet him. I let him sleep on my bed. His expression moved through something complicated and arrived somewhere firm. Right. Okay, that's done then. He reached for a bread roll, with the deliberate normalcy of someone establishing that the world was going to continue. Thanks for telling me it wasn't my fault. I didn't say that, Harry said. You didn't have to. Ron tore the roll in half. Hermione figured it out first, didn't she? She always does, Harry said, and meant it as the highest compliment he knew how to give. Ron almost smiled. Then, he ate his dinner with the specific focus of someone who had decided that dinner was the correct next thing to do. Later that evening, Neville found Harry in the Gryffindor common room. He sat down in the chair across from him and didn't say anything for a moment, turning something over in his hands, his remembrall, permanently red, not because of forgotten homework. My Gran always believed Sirius Black was innocent, Neville said finally. She said she could never make the numbers add up. But no one listened. She was right, Harry said. The people who hurt my parents were working for the same person as Pettigrew. He set the remembrall down on the table between them, very deliberately. Is there anything I can do to help with whatever it is you and Hermione are doing? Harry looked at him, at Neville Longbottom at 13, with his herbology calluses and his quiet solidity and the specific quality of someone who had been living in proximity to a great grief for his entire life and had organized himself around it without letting it hollow him out. What do you want to do? Harry asked. That's different from what I need. Tell me what you want. Neville was quiet for a moment. I want to be there, he said. When it ends, I want to see it. Then we'll make sure you are, Harry said. Sirius Black was exonerated in the 3rd week of November. A Ministry Post owl delivered the news at breakfast. Single sheet, 2 sentences. Sirius Orion Black, acquitted of all charges. Peter Pettigrew, remanded to Ministry custody pending trial. Harry read it twice. Hermione read it once and said, He's going to need somewhere to be. And someone. I know, Harry said. The practical part is straightforward, she said. But I meant the other thing. Harry looked out the window at the November grounds, the flat, dark surface of the lake, the forbidden forest at the edge of everything, the quality of a landscape old enough to have stopped noticing the things that happened on it. Somewhere in the country, in a Ministry facility that was not Azkaban, a man who had been in Azkaban for 12 years was being told he was free. He thought he would spend some time trying anyway. He met Sirius for the first time on a Saturday in late November, in a small anteroom of the Ministry of Magic that smelled of carpet cleaner and bureaucratic anxiety, and that Amelia Bones had arranged with the specific competence of a woman who understood that some reunions needed a room with a door that closed. Sirius was thin in the way that 12 years could make a person thin, not just in body, but in the way the self became thin, when it had been denied ordinary experience for long enough. The soul a little translucent around the edges, visible in a way that people normally weren't. He stood when Harry came in, and he looked at him with the expression of someone who had been told a thing was going to happen and is now in the moment of it happening and finds that being told and being in it are entirely different categories. Harry, he said. Sirius, Harry said. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then, Sirius sat back down, heavily, and rubbed his face with both hands in the gesture of a man managing something he hadn't predicted would hit this hard. You look like James, he said from behind his hands. But you look at things the way Lily looked at things. It's a lot. I know, Harry said. He sat down across from him. I know it's a lot. Take whatever time you need. Sirius dropped his hands. He looked at Harry steadily for a long moment, not the calculating look of a man assessing a stranger, but the look of someone trying to reconcile a memory with a present reality and finding them both true simultaneously. "The boy who got me out," he said. 13 years old. "I had help," Harry said. Hermione Granger. Sirius almost smiled. "Bones told me. Said she'd listed me in the Gringotts access conditions in July, before the term even started." The almost smile became something more complete, the specific warmth of someone encountering evidence of being cared for by people they haven't met yet. "I'd like to thank her. She'll want the thanks in writing," Harry said. "She keeps records." Sirius laughed. It was a short sound, rusty from disuse, but genuine, the laugh of someone who had not expected to laugh today and was caught off guard by it in the best possible way. "All right," he said. "In writing." He was quiet for a moment. What's supposed to happen now?" "Nothing is supposed to happen," Harry said. "That's the point. You have Grimmauld Place, you have the black accounts, you have time. Nothing is required of you." Sirius looked at him as though the concept was one he needed to translate. "Time," he said. "As much as you need," Harry said. Sirius looked at the Ministry Anaroom's institutional carpet for a long moment. "I'm going to paint something," he said finally. "I've been thinking about it for 11 years. The kitchen. I want to paint it yellow." "Then paint it yellow," Harry said. And something in Sirius Black's face settled, just slightly, just enough. As though a question he had been asking for a very long time had finally, unexpectedly, been given a very simple answer. It was a Tuesday afternoon in February of their third year when Snape asked Harry to remain after class. The room emptied. Snape stood at his desk and waited until the last footstep faded. And then he leaned against the front bench and looked at Harry with an expression that Harry had seen perhaps twice across 999 loops, the one reserved for when the professional layers had been deliberately set aside, when what was looking out was purely the intelligence underneath, without the hostility or the complicated grief. "You are not," Snape said with careful precision, "what you appear to be." "I appear to be 13 years old," Harry said. "You are 13 years old in the way that a freshly painted house is new." Snape picked up a vial from his desk, the wit-sharpening potion from last week's advanced demonstration class, which Harry had produced at fifth-year standard without appearing to try. This was made by someone whose hands know the work independently of their mind. Automaticity built across significant repetition. He set it down. "Miss Granger's work is theoretically perfect, in a way that also cannot be explained. She understands potions at the structural level, comprehends why each step produces what it produces, in a way that takes years of dedicated study to develop. She is 13. He paused. "I have spent 30 years as a spy. My primary competency is accurate assessment. I cannot assess accurately from the wrong model." Harry looked at him. The question was real. The intelligence behind it was real, and Snape had come to him privately, not to Dumbledore, not through the institutional hierarchy, with the question he had earned by paying close enough attention to earn it. "I have a question first," Harry said, "and I need you to understand I'm not asking to be difficult or strategic. I need an honest answer. Ask, what side are you on?" The room went very quiet. Snape looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through his expression, not anger, not offense, but the specific quality of someone being asked a question that has a real answer and is deciding whether to give it. The decision, when it came, was visible only in the slight shift of his posture. "Lily Evans's side," he said, "since before she died." Without exception, Harry absorbed this. It was the truest thing Snape had ever said to him in any loop, and it had never before been said in the third year, before the war had made it necessary to say. "Then I'll tell you what I can," Harry said. Not everything. Some of it would create complications I don't have time to manage, and some of it belongs to someone other than me to share. But enough for you to understand what is coming and what you can do about it. He told Snape the shape of it, the loop, the Horcruxes, the specific threat structure of the return that was coming, and the narrowing window in which it could be addressed. He told him about Quirrell, about the diary, about what the fourth year held in store. He told him about Pettigrew, that Sirius Black was innocent. That he had known, and the evidence was now in Gringotts. Snape listened without interruption. His expression did not change. His hands, folded in front of him, did not move. He listened with the total attention of a man for whom listening was a survival skill he had never been able to afford to practice carelessly. When Harry finished, Snape was quiet for a full 30 seconds. Then, Dumbledore knows significantly less than you do right now, Harry said. We've been managing the rate of his understanding carefully. He has a tendency to arrange things, to move people toward outcomes he's already decided on. We've needed him as an observer rather than a director. And you're telling me instead of him, because you have access to Death Eater intelligence that he doesn't, Harry said. We're going to need that in the fourth year and after. We need to know what Voldemort is building toward before he builds it. A pause. And because you've earned the right to this information by paying the kind of attention that earns things. Snape looked at him for a long time. Granger knows you're here, he said. Not a question. It was her suggestion, the particular quality of something almost happening to Snape's expression, caught, contained, and filed. Tell her, he said finally, that the altitude variance data on Bezoar efficacy has been verified in Potions Guild correspondence not available through standard library channels. The figure is closer to 34%. Harry almost smiled. I'll tell her. He stood to go. At the door, Snape said, without looking up from the bench he had returned his attention to. Potter. Yes? Do not tell Dumbledore about this conversation. A pause. Not yet. When the time is right, we will tell him together. With the full account. Agreed, Harry said. He walked out into the dungeon corridor and felt the cold of it, and thought about what it meant that the most cautious man he had ever known had just proposed a shared confidence. It meant Snape had made a decision, and Snape's decisions, once made, did not change. He told Hermione that evening in the library, where she was reading with the focused attention she applied to everything she hadn't already read, which was becoming a shorter list. She listened. She did not say anything for a moment. Then he said it was Lily's side. Yes, not Dumbledore's side, not the Order's side, not even the right side, the way people usually mean it. She turned the page without reading it. He said her side. Yes, that's different, she said. That means it's personal rather than principled, which sounds like a criticism but is actually the opposite. Principled loyalty is conditional on the principle holding. Personal loyalty is not conditional, Harry said. Not conditional, she confirmed. It also means he's been carrying it for a very long time without anyone knowing, which is its own kind of weight. She finally looked at the page she had turned. Did you tell him about the loops? The shape of it. Not the numbers. The numbers would have disturbed him, she said. Yes, he doesn't need the numbers. He needs to know what is coming and where to position himself to be useful when it arrives. And now he knows. Now he knows. Harry sat down across from her. He told me the Bezoar altitude variance figure is closer to 34%. Hermione looked up from the book. 34, she said. Verified in Potions Guild correspondence. She reached for her notepad, made a single precise notation, and returned to her reading with the expression of someone who has received exactly the information they needed and has filed it in exactly the right place. The middle Horcruxes were handled across the Christmas holiday of their fourth year, Neville present as he had asked to be. The ring, in a ruined house in the West Country that had once belonged to the Gaunt family, was destroyed using basilisk venom applied by a method Hermione had developed over 2 months of precise theoretical work to eliminate the curse embedded in the stone. The locket was retrieved from a coastal cave, the process requiring the methodical preparation that Hermione produced exceptionally well, and the navigational patience Harry had developed across 999 repetitions of the same war. The cup and the diadem were addressed through Gringotts and the Room of Requirement, respectively. The Gringotts operation, a morning that Harry would count among the more remarkable of 1,000 attempts, executed with Graknar's cooperation and the thoroughness that goblins brought to every undertaking. The Room of Requirement presenting them with what they needed, with the elegant indifference of a space that had been fulfilling requests for 1,000 years, and saw no reason to make this one difficult. Neville did not destroy any of them. That was not why Harry had included him. What Neville did was carry witness. The value of having someone present who was neither strategist nor executor, someone who simply watched and remembered and was there, was something Harry had not predicted, and Hermione said she should have. It changed the weight of what they were doing. Anchored it, made it real in a way that operations performed only by people who had been doing them for the equivalent of centuries occasionally failed to be. "Is that all of them?" Neville asked at the end of the second day. "One left," Harry said. "Nagini, the snake, she stays with him." Neville nodded. "Then, it's nearly over." He said it with the quiet certainty of someone who had spent his whole life in proximity to a story he hadn't known all of, and was finally seeing the shape of the ending. Not relief, he would feel relief later, when it was finished. What he felt now was something older and more useful than relief. He was ready. The visit to Malfoy Manor came in February. Lucius Malfoy had been operational since Voldemort's first fall. Not a soldier, but a network node, maintaining the connections and the funding and the social legitimacy that would make the return logistically possible. Walden McNair and Augustus Rookwood served similar functions, 3 men who had not stepped away from the work in the years between. Hermione had been precise about what they were proposing. "This is not justice," she had said in the sitting room at Grimmauld Place 6 weeks before. "It's prevention. Forward-looking, not backward. The consequences we're choosing are not proportional to what they've already done, they're calibrated to what they will do if we don't act. We need to be clear about that distinction, internally, before we do anything." Harry had agreed. They used the ley line approach, the ancient magical substrate beneath the manor's wards, accessible to anyone with founding compact authority, which the manor's wards had been anchored to without ever accounting for the possibility that someone might access the anchor layer directly. Lucius Malfoy was in his study. His wand was in his hand before Harry registered the movement, and the curse he cast was absorbed by the ward Harry had assembled from the substrate during their approach, built into the room's foundation while they were still in the fields outside. Lucius looked at his wand, then at Harry. Then at Hermione, the expression of a man whose threat assessment practice had encountered its ceiling. "This is not going to hurt," Harry said. The dissolution of a magical core was not violent, and it was not dramatic. It was the gentle return of something to where it came from, the ley line energy that had organized itself in a particular person over a lifetime, released back into the substrate, the person entirely intact in every way that mattered to living a human life. Entirely without magic. 40 seconds for Lucius, 35 each for the others. Draco was at school. They had discussed Draco at length and arrived at the same conclusion from different directions. Draco Malfoy, 14 years old, 4th year at Hogwarts, had not yet made the irreversible choice that would define the version of himself he became. The choice still existed ahead of him. They would leave it there. Narcissa Malfoy, in the East Wing, they left entirely undisturbed. On the walk back through the February fields, the time site went quiet, Not gone, but dimmed, its continuous signal reduced to something Harry had to reach for. He noted it. The literature had been accurate. "The weight," Hermione said, walking beside him. "Yes, how bad?" "Manageable." He walked for a moment. "You?" "I keep thinking about his face," she said, when he picked up his wand and understood. The moment he knew. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. "I'm going to keep thinking about it." "Yes," Harry said. "So am I." Some things were better held in silence, at least for a while. They had both learned that not everything needed to be resolved immediately to be held responsibly. They walked the rest of the way through the fields without speaking. The February ground was hard underfoot, the sky the flat gray of a winter afternoon that had not decided whether to produce weather. The manor sat behind them in its grounds with its wards entirely intact. They had not touched the wards, had not disturbed the geography of the place in any way that was visible from the outside. And somewhere inside it 3 men were sitting with a new fact about themselves that they had not asked for and had no framework for, and would spend some significant portion of the rest of their lives finding out what it meant to live with. Harry thought about Lucius Malfoy picking up his wand, the weight of it in a hand that had always known what a wand was and had found it, in that moment, utterly ordinary. An object. A stick! He thought about all the things that had been built on the assumption that the magic would always be there, and what it left when the assumption was removed. He thought, this is what prevention costs, not the doing of it, the knowing that you've done it, and the carrying of that knowledge afterward. He thought Hermione was right that they would keep thinking about it. He thought that was probably the correct response, that the alternatives, which were either not thinking about it or thinking about it without weight, were both wrong in different directions. He turned his collar up against the February wind. They reached the apparition point and went home. The winter was very quiet. The fields held them in it. The Goblet of Fire arrived at the castle in the final week of October, the Beauxbatons carriage and the Durmstrang ship having arrived on schedule. Igor Karkaroff's performance of authority as carefully maintained as ever, Olympe Maxime moving through the entrance hall with the precision of a woman who had spent her career managing the problem of existing in excess of the categories available to her. Maxime felt Harry and Hermione before she saw them. She adjusted her course by approximately 2 inches, not visible to most people, and kept walking. That was the more sophisticated response to an unexpected variable, and it told Harry something useful about her. On Halloween at midnight, the Goblet's selections were Cedric Diggory for Hogwarts, Fleur Delacour for Beauxbatons, Victor Krum for Durmstrang. And then the fire changed color. Not the red of selection. Something that occupied the space between colors. The recognitions state the relevant literature described as the artifact's signal for encountering something outside its measurement range. 2 pieces of parchment rose simultaneously, side by side, and Dumbledore caught them both. Harry Potter. Hermione Granger. They walked forward together, and the goblet's binding reached toward them as they walked, seeking to anchor the physical sensation of a very old and very absolute magical contract attempting to establish itself. Harry felt it. He did not fight it. Fighting the goblet's binding was not possible. It was not a ward to be bypassed or a clause to be argued around. It was a commitment mechanism, ancient and final. What it bound was presence and participation. The form of that participation was, according to the Charter's actual text, a separate question, one that Bartemius Crouch Sr., reading the Charter in Dumbledore's office, with the attention of a man who had written enough legal documents to know where the productive ambiguities lived, would eventually identify. In the meeting the following morning, Maxime cut through the procedural noise first. Before we decide anything, I would like to understand what the goblet actually selected. 2 magical signatures significantly older than their bodies, Harry said. The goblet was calibrated 4 centuries ago. Its selection criteria were set then and have not been adjusted since. We exceeded the calibration range. In the absence of a category for what we are, it defaulted to the highest available measurement. Crouch looked up from the charter. The document specifies that selected champions must participate in each task. It does not specify the nature of that participation. We propose to participate as assessors, Hermione said. The binding requires our presence and involvement. The form is a separate question from the fact of it. The magical commitment they had both felt in the entrance hall, the goblet's ancient mechanics, settled, not fully satisfied, but accommodated. The artifact apparently recognized the distinction between presence and competition. Karkaroff objected on principle. Maxim looked at him with the patience of a woman who had been finding him tiresome for years. Igor, the goblet, selected them. This is not a matter of our preferences. Maxim requested a private meeting in the third week of November. She sat across from them in the East Reading Room and said, "I am not here to negotiate. I am here because I have been doing this work for 20 years, and I have encountered perhaps 3 things I did not have a category for. You are the third. I would like to understand you better, if you are willing." The meeting lasted 4 hours. At its end, Maxime looked at the ceiling with the expression of a woman who had received more information than she asked for and was deciding what it required of her. "His return," she said. "When it comes, and you're telling me it will, Beauxbatons will not be neutral. I want you to know that now. Not after the fact, not when it's already obvious." Now, Harry looked at her. In 999 loops, Olympe Maxime had been many things. A reluctant ally, a diplomatic neutral, a figure who did the minimum required by the situation and no more. He had never heard this, in this room, in this year before the war had made it necessary. "Thank you," he said, and meant it in a way he had not often managed. "Fleur," Maxime said. "My champion. She is a good person and a strong witch. She will be curious about you. I would not discourage her curiosity." "We won't," Hermione said. Maxime stood. She looked at them both with the expression she had been developing since the entrance hall. The look of a woman who had built a category for something that had none and found the category sound. "The thing the goblet saw," she said. "Whatever it was, I'm glad it's here." She picked up her coat. "I think we are going to need it." Voldemort returned on the shortest night of the year. Not through the graveyard ritual that had required Pettigrew's hand and Harry's blood. Pettigrew was in ministry custody, and Harry had spent 4 years ensuring he never came within reach of either. What Voldemort used instead was older, a ritual of forced return through the leyline substrate, requiring no ingredients from specific people, only the will of a sufficiently powerful consciousness to drive its soul back into physical form. The body it produced was not optimal. It was functional. It was enough. Harry felt it through the time sight at 2 a.m, a sharp, cold, directional signal from somewhere in the Scottish Highlands, the returning frequency of a consciousness that had decided to stop waiting. He lay in the Gryffindor dormitory for 30 seconds, accounting. Then he got up. He woke Hermione first. Then he went to Neville's dormitory and knocked. Neville opened the door in his pajamas, already awake. "The castle felt different just now," he said. "Not a question." "It did," Harry said. "It's time. Are you ready?" Neville looked at him. Behind the obvious nerves, behind the weight of it, there was the same quality that had been there on the boats in first year, the solidity of someone who has organized himself around a difficult thing and is not going to let the difficulty change his answer. "Yes," Neville said. "Let me get my wand." In Dumbledore's office at 3 a.m, the headmaster listened to their account with his hands folded and the arithmetic behind his eyes running faster than Harry had ever seen it run. When they finished, he looked at each of them in turn. Harry, Hermione, Neville standing slightly behind them with his jaw set. "What do you need from me?" Dumbledore said. In 999 loops, Dumbledore had said many things in moments like this. He had explained plans and withheld information and offered help that was also management. He had never asked this question, in these terms, before the confrontation rather than after it. "Clear the grounds," Harry said, "and stay in the castle. The castle needs you inside it. You're going out to meet him." "Yes," Dumbledore looked at Neville. "And Mr. Longbottom, he asked to be there," Harry said. "He earned it." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then he reached for a lemon drop, and this time he ate it, the Dumbledore behavior that indicated not comfort but decision, the resolution of an internal argument in favor of a particular course. "Amelia Bones was notified 10 minutes ago," he said. "I made that call before you arrived. She'll be here within the hour." He paused. "The Ministry needs the arrest to be theirs. For what comes after, the legitimacy of the rebuilding depends on it." "You're right," Harry said. "Yes, be careful," Dumbledore said. And then, "That is insufficient, and I know it. But I find I want to say it." "We'll take it," Hermione said. He came from the north across the June grounds at 4 in the morning, and the dew was beginning on the grass, and the lake held its flat, dark surface, and the forbidden forest stood at the edge of everything with its 1,000 years of patient indifference. He was tall. The body was close to what he had been, translated slightly. The specific quality of something moved between states with the translation not quite lossless. Diminished, and he knew it, and his eyes held the calculation of a man who has assessed his resources and decided that speed was more important than preparation because every hour of delay was worse than the hour before. He looked at Harry. He looked at Hermione. He looked at Neville Longbottom standing 3 feet behind them, and something moved through his expression at the sight of the third person, reassessment, the cold updating of a model. "Interesting company," he said. "He asked to be here," Harry said. "He earned it. The Hallows. The loop." Voldemort's voice had its precise carrying quality, unchanged. "I have built a model for each. The harmonization I cannot model." And the 7th Horcrux, his eyes moved to Harry's scar and held there, "which I can no longer feel." "It was removed," Harry said, carefully and with help. A pause. "How, the Hallows, used in combination. The Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, the Cloak." He held Voldemort's gaze. "I died for approximately 4 hours and came back without it. The details are in the Gringotts verification chamber if anyone ever needs them." Something moved through Voldemort's expression, the cold rewriting of a model that has just had its foundational assumption removed. The 7th anchor, gone. The other 6, gone before it. 3 of his most reliable operatives stripped of their capacity. The original return plan dismantled. The backup plan producing a limited and constrained body. "You were thorough," he said. Not a compliment. An accurate description. He cast. The severing working, the thing he had designed in the months between his first dissolution and tonight, built specifically to target the harmonization, the connection between Harry and Hermione that he had identified as the variable he couldn't model. It hit the space between them with the force of something designed not for individual harm, but for structural disruption. Hermione moved toward it, Harry moved to her. They held it together, from both ends, simultaneously, with the combination of force and stillness that came from 2 people who had been working together for 999 loops, even when only one of them knew it. The harmonization was not a connection that could be severed. It was a property of what they were together, the way a chord was not 2 notes but the relationship between them, and you could not attack a relationship by attacking its expression. The working collapsed. Nagini struck from Harry's right. He spoke, Parseltongue, founding compact register, the oldest address in the language. And she stopped 6 feet from Hermione, the coils settling on the dew-wet grass. Harry performed the dissolution on the Horcrux fragment inside her, the last of the 6 external anchors, and felt it release and disperse. Nagini lay on the grass, entirely herself, her yellow eyes open and present with the quality of a creature no longer carrying something additional. Voldemort raised his wand. Hermione performed the wand binding, the Founder era working, operating on the connection between wand and wielder rather than on either separately. The wand fell. He stood without it. Neville Longbottom, who had not moved from his position since they arrived, who had been holding exactly the ground Harry had asked him to hold, said quietly from 3 feet behind, "It's over, isn't it?" "Yes," Harry said. "Good," said Neville. The single word had everything that needed to be in it. Voldemort looked at Harry. Not with hatred. Harry had expected hatred and found something else, something more difficult to receive because it was more honest. The expression of someone looking at the thing they have been afraid of having done to them for as long as they can remember, now that it has finally been done. Something almost human in the coldest eyes Harry had ever known. Dumbledore appeared at the tree line. He had not stayed in the castle. He had come to the edge and waited, watching, performing the function he had understood was required of him. He walked across the grounds now, unhurried, covering the distance with the deliberate pace of someone approaching something that has already been resolved. He stopped beside Harry. "Tom," he said. "Not Lord Voldemort. Not he who must not be named." The name from before, the name of a boy who had decided he needed a different one, said in the voice of a man who had known him and watched what he became and was looking at the result. Amelia Bones crossed the grounds at the head of 6 oars with the professional efficiency of a woman implementing a prepared contingency. She assessed the scene, Voldemort without his wand, Nagini alive and disenchanted on the grass, Dumbledore and 3 Hogwarts students standing in the pre-dawn, and she deployed her team without breaking stride. She looked at Harry before she moved to Voldemort. "The Gringotts record," she said. "Already outdated," Harry said. "It was a contingency. The contingency didn't occur." She almost smiled. Then she went to work. Harry and Hermione and Neville stood in the June dark and watched Amelia Bones do what she had spent 30 years becoming very good at doing. The sky was beginning, almost imperceptibly, to belong to a different day, the quality of Scottish summer at 4 in the morning, where the dark was already thinning around the edges before anyone had admitted that night was ending. Dumbledore stood beside them. "I owe you both," he said, "a conversation that is long overdue." "Yes," Hermione said. "You do. Tomorrow, my office." "At our convenience," Harry said. "Not yours." Dumbledore absorbed this. "Adjusted, of course. When you're ready. Entirely when you're ready." He looked at the sky. "I find that I have a great many things to revise." He paused. "It will keep." He looked at Neville. "Mr. Longbottom," he said, "I should like to speak with your grandmother. When the time is appropriate. There are things she has been owed for a very long time." Neville looked at him. "Yes," Neville said. "She has." The sky continued its slow announcement of the next day, indifferent to everything that had happened below it, committed only to arriving. Harry and Hermione stood in the June dark and watched the sky do this, watched it the way you watched a thing you had spent the equivalent of 1,000 years trying to reach and had finally reached, which was quietly, without performance, with the attention of someone who was learning that the thing they had been working toward was not a destination but a condition, and the condition was simply this: being here, present, in a world that was damaged in particular ways and was being repaired in particular ways and was, despite everything, still going. "We should sleep," Hermione said. "Yes," Harry said. "We should." Neither of them moved for another moment. The grounds were very still. Bones's aurors had gone with Voldemort, and the castle's lights were beginning to come on in the sequence that meant the occupants inside were waking, were processing, were learning that the thing that had been feared for the entirety of most of their conscious lives had, in the course of one June night, been reduced to a man in auror custody without his wand. The castle itself was doing what very old things did with significant events, holding them the way stone held warmth, slowly, without announcement, keeping the shape of what had happened and the texture of its walls. Neville said, "Do you think it'll stick this time?" Harry looked at him. "Yes," he said. "I do." "How do you know?" Harry thought about how to answer this honestly. "Because this time," he said, "it wasn't just me." Neville considered this. He looked at the castle, at the lights coming on, at the sky doing its slow, patient work of becoming morning. "Good," he said, for the second time in the same night, with the same quality as before, the single word containing everything it needed to contain and nothing it didn't. They walked back to the castle together, Harry and Hermione and Neville Longbottom, across the dew-wet June grounds, in the light that arrived before sunrise in Scotland, not dark and not yet day, something between the two that belonged to neither and to both. The castle doors opened for them. The stone held its 1,000-year warmth around them. Harry walked in. For the first time in 1,000 attempts, he walked in without counting how many times he had done it before, without measuring the moment against all its previous versions, without the weight of the accounting that had been the background condition of every step he had taken for the equivalent of a millennium. He walked in, and it was just walking in. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.